Welcome to the webinar. Hello, everyone. Hi there, we'll get started in just a minute. All right. Well, welcome everyone. The webinar is going to begin at the top of the hour, and all of this will be recorded. So we just want to let you know to please connect with National PTA and the Institute for Educational Leadership on social media. We encourage you to follow our Facebook and our Twitter pages. So that's at National PTA, at IEL Connects, and at FCE Network. And we also encourage you to use our hashtag PTA Standards. Tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar. We love to retweet everything that you are learning. So please put that on Twitter, hashtag PTA Standards. We really encourage you to share your questions, your reflections, and observations through that channel. And just again, a reminder, so the webinar will begin very shortly, and it will be recorded entirely and shared with you afterwards. So hang tight, we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, well, it is the top of the hour. So once again, welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Daniel Aaron Price, National PTA's Family and Community Engagement Manager. I just have a few housekeeping details that I'd like to give to you all before we get started. So first, we'd really love you to introduce yourselves in the chat. So click on the chat box at the bottom of your screen to share your name, your city or state, and or what organization you represent, if that's applicable. Be sure to select panelists and attendees so we know who everybody is. All of our panelists can see the chat as well. All attendees are in listen only mode, but we really encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will dedicate the last 10 to 15 minutes of the webinar to respond to some of your questions and field some of the questions to our panelists in our conversation today. So the webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording, including all of the resources that you see shared as links in the chat, including a full transcript of the chat itself, will be compiled and shared out to all of you in a follow-up email for all that are here today and for all registrants. I would like to remind everyone that this is the third webinar in our 5-part Transforming Family School Partnerships series. We'll be hosting more webinars throughout the next couple of months with different panels and even more conversation. So I'll be sure to add a link in the chat box with more information and registration for the future webinars as well. All right. Well, National PTA is excited and grateful to partner with the Institute for Educational Leadership to co-host the webinar series today. They have been a wonderful partner to PTA and greatly contributed to helping us update the national standards for family school partnerships and to develop this webinar series. So it's my honor to introduce an incredible individual who's really been a true advocate for family engagement and setting students up for success, Kwesi Rollins. So Kwesi is a member of IEL's senior leadership team and guides IEL's portfolio of programs designed to develop and support leaders with a particular emphasis on family and community engagement, early childhood education, and community-based leadership development. Kwesi, take it away.
Thanks so much, Daniel. Very excited to be here. And again, Kwesi Rollins at the Institute for Educational Leadership in Washington, D.C. We're just very excited to continue to partner with the National PTA Center for Family Engagement on this webinar series. And like many webinar series are all hopefully, they're really designed to help us learn, to help us hear different perspectives, to understand variations on a common theme. And the new standards are critically important, new standards for family school partnerships as we think about all the turmoil that education has been in over the last couple of years for a variety of reasons, and all of the solutions that are being put forward to kind of address those challenges. Family school partnerships are critical to that. There's no way we can achieve the goals that we want to achieve in terms of accelerating learning, in terms of making up for learning loss, if that's a term that makes sense for you. We can't do any of it without engaging with families, without partnering with families. And so family school partnerships are critical. And that's today's topic, transforming family school partnerships. Obviously important. I look forward to hearing from everyone. We have a really dynamic panel. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce a colleague and friend, Frances Frost, who's currently at the Office of Wellbeing, Learning, and Achievement for Montgomery County Public Schools, which is in Maryland, and is currently the chair of the National PTA's Family Engagement Committee. Frances?
Thank you, Kwesi, and it's always a great opportunity to partner with you and the folks at IEL. You guys are always great partners and also exceptionally great people. So here at National PTA, our mission is to engage and empower families and communities to advocate for all children. Partnering with like-minded organizations like IEL is so important in helping us achieve that mission. For those of you who are new to PTA, we're an organization of nearly 3 million members. That's parents, teachers, students, community members who are working together to make sure every child reaches their potential. Now, we are excited for today's conversation in our Transforming Family School Partnerships, PTA National Standards webinar series number 3. We are all here today because we know families are essential partners to providing a high quality education for every student. Based on decades of research, we know that students whose families are engaged in school participate better and achieve better in school. They are more successful from K through 12. And we also know that teachers and schools are better off when they invest in engaging with their families. The question for us no longer is if we should engage families, but how do we do it in a way that helps our communities, schools, and young people to thrive? This question is why for over 30 years ago, National PTA created the National Standards for Family School Partnerships. These PTA national standards have set the bar for how we should all work together to support student success. Since their initial creation, the national standards for family school partnerships have been used by PTAs, schools, districts, and even our Department of Education for accountability and support for strong family engagement, including as the foundation for PTA's Schools of Excellence program. Before now, the standards were revised in 2008. So we all know there's a lot of changes since 2008. So last year, National PTA set upon revising and updating these standards with 3 main goals. One, we incorporated the research of family engagement and families and students in our schools. We integrated the perspective of families, educators, and youth, particularly those marginalized communities that we often don't hear from, even when we're talking about family engagement. And we improved the usefulness of the standards for our different stakeholders, for school districts, for PTA leaders, and for families. So how did we go about doing this? National PTA partnered with PTAs and other nonprofits across the country to ensure that we were hearing from people who we often don't hear from and whose voices often get left out of such surveys and such research. So we are proud that we were able to talk to over 600 different participants in listening sessions and respondents. And as you'll see on the screen, they represented a diversity of our families and students who are in our schools. We also talked with community members, looked at best practices and evidence-based research, and engaged with our expert advisory group to make sure that we were getting some of the best research information to inform our national standards. So you can expect 4 main things with these updated national standards for family school partnerships. First, you will see that we have 6 standards. They were the 6 that we had before, and they have not changed. In our research, we realized these 6 standards are still good. They are still the pillars for our family engagement. And so we left those 6 standards. But where you're going to see the change is that we've explicitly made sure that we've included equity and more cultural inclusion in our standards, so that you will see more guidance for our schools to make sure that they are including our families, considering diverse perspectives of students, families, and teachers as we go forward and engaging. This is part of PTA's mission. We're here to advocate for every child and to make sure that every child reaches their potential. So when we say every child, we want these standards to work for every child and their family. Third, you'll see that we've expanded the definition of student success. For a long time, we've identified and defined student success purely as academic measures, reading scores, math scores. However, we realized that a well-rounded student incorporates so much more than their academics scores. So you'll see in these standards that we talk about a student's well-being, we talk about their emotional growth and their development as young people. And lastly, you'll see a differentiating guidance by role. We wanted these standards to be useful to our various stakeholders, whether they're school district leaders, classroom teachers, PTA leaders. We wanted this guide to be useful. So you'll see guidance for these different roles on how to implement and apply these standards to make sure that they're effective in those different school roles. So today's session, we're going to highlight the 3rd national standard, support student success. So the goal of this standard are to get families, students, and educators on the same page about how students are progressing and ensuring families are valued partners in their children's education at home and at school. The update of this standard emphasizes the importance of timely, proactive, and actionable communication to support students' academic and socio-emotional success. We have invited 4 incredible individuals to have a conversation today around fostering partnerships between families, schools, and students to uplift academic, social, and emotional learning, setting up all students for success. I am excited to hear about the incredible work that these 4 are doing, and I know that you will enjoy the conversation among them. So now I'm pleased to welcome our moderator, Dr. Margaret Casp. Dr. Casp is the Senior Research Consultant at the National Association of Family, School, and Community Engagement. You may see them as NAFSCE. She co-leads NAFSCE's initiative to reimagine how family-facing professionals are prepared for family and community engagement. This includes the family engagement core competencies that NAFSCE has released to support educator training. Dr. Casp.
Thank you so much, Frances. I'm super excited to be here today. and to really welcome our panel, our incredible panel of speakers. If you would like to view all of the full bios, please click the link in the chat that's going to be appearing in a few minutes. But here with us today, and maybe you can all give a wave, we have Dr. Maria Paredes, who is a Senior Engagement Manager at WestEd, where she provides training and technical assistance to improve the effectiveness and impact of family engagement for school improvement. We have Dr. Judah DeShields, who is the Chief Program and Strategy Officer at Power My Learning, an awesome organization advancing educational equity nationwide by activating the power and collaboration among teachers, students, and families. We have Delisa Crane, who is the administrator for the Washoe County School District Family School Partnerships Department. And she leads systemic efforts in Nevada's second largest district for family engagement, with more than 103 schools and 62,000 students. So happy to have her time today. And last, but definitely not least, we have Wendy Lopez, who is the Vice President of Content and Partnerships at Learning Heroes, another terrific organization striving to really bridge the gap between what families think about their child's grade level progress and how their child is actually doing in school. So I know we have limited time, so let's go ahead and get started. So since our discussion today really centers on supporting student success, and Francis, I really love what you said about, well-rounded students are so much more than just their grades. I really wanted to explore with each of you the components involved in strengthening students' academic, social, and emotional learning. For this to occur, we know we need families, schools, and communities and students themselves really joining together as a team. So to start our conversation, can each of you please describe to our audience from your vantage point what effective and continuous collaboration looks like between families, communities, students, and educators to set students up for success? And Maria, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here and be able to spend this time with this great panel. So continuous collaboration in our work, continuous collaboration really hinges on the quality and consistency of the communication that flows between the school to the home and back, right? For parents and families to really have the ability to be connected to student learning, to support their child's learning, to be a teacher and a mentor at home, to be a coach at home. Some of the important information that we have to keep in mind that parents have to have, and that is, as parents, we have to regularly receive grade level learning priority information. What is my child learning right now, this quarter, this month? Because that's going to tell me how I can, what my focus is going to be as a parent, right? Or as the person that is actually supporting the learning at home. As a parent, I also need to know, how is my child doing? How is my child doing in math and science and social studies? Both informative and summative assessment, and even the kind of classroom assessments that are done sometimes weekly and sometimes even more often. But I need to know if my child is on grade level or if I need to really step it up as a parent. So all of this to say that parents need more information than just report cards. They need a full picture. I also need to know as a parent if my child is receiving interventions and what that looks like so that I can support that intervention and add additional time of practice. I also need to know, when is my child being tested? What's the content that is going to be part of that test, whether it's a small test or a large test, right? Something more comprehensive. And the last thing I need to know really is opportunities that are available for my child. Enrichment that is available after school, during the summer, any time that my child can be surrounded by other students, other families, other adults. All of that is really critical for me to be able to make decisions that complement my child's learning. So I think all of that is information. When information is flowing consistently and predictably in the language of the family, very important. Families need to receive that in their own language. Then there's a better chance that continuous collaboration can take place, and the parent has a stronger ability to be a partner with the school and the community.
Maria, thank you so much for that. I love this idea of information flowing. Makes me think of a river of some sort. Wendy, can I hand it over to you? What's effective and continuous collaboration look like from your vantage point?
Yeah, so first, thanks for including us in this important conversation, and want to really recognize, as Francis was laying out, the thoughtful approach to updating the standards. We'll say that from our vantage point, we love that goal one of standard 3 is explicitly team up for success. So in our national research, we asked parents and educators what terms best represent their goal for family engagement. And for all 3, parents, teachers, and principals, the terms trust and teamwork rose to the top, above terms we often use in the field like partnership and collaboration. So at Learning Heroes, we strive to make our national research really actionable for partner organizations, school leaders, and educators, so that together we can continue to deepen family-school relationships in service of student outcomes, which is why I'm so excited to be part of this conversation. So what does that look like for us? Excited to share that we've recently released Unlocking the How. Francis was talking about, it's not about if we to do family engagement, but really how. And it's authored by Dr. Eyal Bergman on our team, and is rooted in not only Learning Heroes research, but the well-established research codified in the dual capacity building framework for family school partnerships, as well as lessons from the pandemic captured in Embracing a New Normal toward a more liberatory approach to family engagement. So the report offers 3 concrete recommendations that are very aligned to the standards, all around building a comprehensive strategy that centers 3 interconnected pillars. So the first being placing trust and teamwork at the center of the homeschool relationship. So we put forth the research around relational trust as a set of questions for leaders. So for example, are we seeking input, listening, and really valuing what all parents have to say? Are we demonstrating to all families that we see them as competent and valuable caretakers? Do we keep our word with families? Do we show families that we value and care about them as people? We know that schools that excel in building and restoring trust invest in time in asking questions and really intentionally unearthing families' funds of knowledge. I know when I was a 2nd grade teacher doing home visits, they were central to building trust and ultimately helped me be a better teacher, which leads to pillar 2 and what we're here to talk about today, anchoring family engagement strategies to student learning and well-being. My favorite quote from the report is, family engagement is not an end to itself. The reason for building a trusting team is to really maximize each of our roles to support children's learning. And as I know we're going to delve in, our research shines a light on that we are leaving parents in the dark about their children's progress, when in fact they say the number one thing they want from school communication is the truth about their children's progress. And then finally, the 3rd pillar is what allows the first 2 to take hold, which is investing in building systems and structures that really integrate and sustain the work over time. And we'll say that in addition to some concrete actions and recommendations, the report also includes many case studies and examples from across the country, including Maria and West Ed's great work around academic parent-teacher teams.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So I'm going to hand it over to Delisa to describe a little bit of what you're thinking when you think about continuous collaboration.
Thank you, Dr. Casp. And I really appreciate Wendy's comments and also Dr. Paredes's comments about the relationship piece and the trust and the communication. And also to National PTA for really expanding this standard to include the whole child. So in our district and in our department for close to 2 decades, we've used data and evaluation and continuous improvement to really look at how are we equitably serving our families and students, who's showing up in our data, what are our families saying, and are we listening to their most present needs? So I'll just talk a little bit about one of our recent initiatives. Even before the pandemic, we knew that mental health and well-being was a major issue for our kids and also a barrier to student learning. Nevada is 51st in the nation for mental health, according to a recent study by UNLV. We are a resource desert, so that has caused us to be very creative. And so last year, our parent university, led by our incredible Maria Fernandez in our district, held a listening session with our families regarding mental health and well-being and how to support their students at home. And so that listening session, really listening to our families, we've learned how to sort of creatively address some of these issues and support and capacity building. So we've borrowed strategies from neighboring districts like Elk Grove, and we've held screenings of the indie flicks movie Angst, which is about teenage anxiety, and then partnered with our school-based mental health professionals so that families could have a discussion afterwards. We've also partnered with local community-based organizations. So we have the Children's Cabinet that leads mental health for our kids in our community, and a group of mental health professionals and pediatricians with our local hospital recently to really expand our district's capacity to reach out to families and hold space and listen to how they're connecting to our mental health resources. And in full honesty, and this has been within the last month, our numbers and our turnout haven't been great, right? So we know there's still a lot of stigma in many of our communities around mental health, and just walking through the door. In some ways, unfortunately, I think that can still bring some feelings of shame, right? Or just some real vulnerabilities that walking through the door on a workshop on mental health might not feel safe to some of our families. So we're doing a lot of brainstorming right now, and we're talking about those critical transition points when we have lots of families engaged. So for instance, our schools are getting ready to host family engagement transition events, transition into middle school, transition into high school. We know lots of families show up to those events, and we're talking about how do we pair mental health discussions with topics that maybe feel a little bit safer. So it might be screen time and mental health, or adolescent development and mental health. So when we have a couple hundred families in the building, we can offer these capacity building discussions or workshops and really learn and listen to our families. So for us, it's always going to be continuous improvement. It's always going to be adjusting and always looking at our data to ensure that we are equitably reaching our families and our kids who have the least amount of access to the resources.
That's awesome. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Judan, sorry, for thinking a little bit more about what continuous and effective collaboration looks like. We've heard about mutual trust. We've heard about data for continuous improvement. We've heard keep the information flowing. So we'd love to hear a little bit from your perspective and Power My Learning's perspective as well.
Thank you, and it's great to be here. It's great to see over 250 people here to hear about and engage in this work, because it's critically important. And we appreciate the call out around continuous collaboration and partnership, because if we look at the status quo, we look at how schools and districts have operated for a long time, it's not continuous. It's sort of like this one-time, one-way street of engagement. And our work really exists at Power My Learning to disrupt that status quo. So as schools and districts we invite parents and communities and families in when it's convenient for back to school night, for parent teacher conferences. And we position ourselves sort of as experts and say, well, we're going to invite you in when it's convenient for us. And we only want you to engage in these small ways. And if we learn anything from the pandemic and from virtual learning, we saw how broken that paradigm was. And in many districts, we went from leaning on parents and families about 10% to all of a sudden leaning on them about 110% to get the work of educating our young people done. And because of that, as a result, what we're seeing now in a lot of our school districts is this need to repair and restore relationships with community and family, because we leaned on them absent the support that they actually needed and without the recognition of what they were bringing to the table. So our work really exists to bridge that gap. In many ways, we haven't done enough as schools and school communities to acknowledge the expertise, the wisdom, the investment that our parents have given to our young people and to us before they even step through our doors in pre-K 3 and 4. And not only that, but every night when we send them home. So our work is about equipping capacity for leaders, both systems and school leaders, teachers, and then families to learn how to effectively partner together, and specifically around the learning process. So we start with systems level leaders, and we start there because ultimately they set the strategy at the highest level for how we will equip our communities and families with the tools to be successful in partnership with us. So we intentionally build in supports for them through professional learning and through coaching to really understand how you meaningfully bring in family and community into your strategy, how to get them to a place where they can evaluate it and set it with you, and then what that looks like as you tackle the work together. With our school leaders, it's about building the conditions for effective allyship, as we refer to it, acknowledging that both family and school are working towards the same outcomes, even if we stand in a different lane. So how do you build the conditions for allyship such that it's not just one more thing, but it's integrated into your system? And then with teachers, we help them to become better, stronger teachers by giving them tangible skills that they can use to collaborate more effectively with families. Lastly, but most importantly, we host formal training for families. We teach them the rules of the game, so to speak, about how schools work, how to use their funds of knowledge and their expertise and wisdom in order to gain access to schools, to teachers, to leaders, to again, collaborate more effectively. So all told, we refer to this holistic approach of building capacity as a triangle of learning relationships. And we believe that if we do it effectively, then teachers, students, leaders, families, and communities are working in concert in a coherent way to build up the wellness, both academically and social emotionally, of our young people.
Thank you for that. I think that vision of the triangle is really powerful. So Wendy, I'm gonna follow up with you first. So I'm thinking about how Learning Heroes really offers a broad range of resources to help really pave a pathway for success in students' careers. And, I myself have used your gut check numerous times, readiness check with my own kiddos at home. And I also know that Learning Heroes, as you described earlier, has also done a lot of research on the topic as well. So I was hoping that you might be able to kick us off with describing Learning Heroes' annual research and giving us a glimpse at the current landscape of student success. And also, if you were going to grade schools now for how they're engaging parents, what grade would you give them?
Yeah, grades are tricky. We're going to talk about that. And thank you for using the readiness check. Our nationally representative data has consistently since 2016 and now post-pandemic 2022 shown that 92% of parents, regardless of race, income, or education, believe their children are at or above grade level, despite the growing body of national and data and state data telling us a very different story, and a story that cuts across all student groups, but has disproportionately, affected students of color and low performing students. So as we think about that 92%, I know a lot of us are steeped in this, but consider that The average scores of the class of 2022 declined to the lowest level in more than 30 years. The 2022 Nations Report Card showed unprecedented declines in math and significant dips in reading, with only 26% of 8th graders at proficient level in math, and even lower for our Black and Brown students, 9% for Black students and 14% for Hispanics. The Education Recovery Scorecard, which is a great resource, found that the average US public school student lost the equivalent of half a year of learning in math and a quarter of a year in reading. So we've been delving into this, what's at the heart of the disconnect, and our data really shows that grades in large part sit at the heart of it. 84% of parents report their kids are getting B's or better. Understandably, they believe that means grade level mastery. Parents consistently rank report card grades as the top measure to know how their child is progressing, and yet only 30% of teachers rate report card grades as one of the important ways to gauge student achievement. The data also shows more promising opportunities for us to lean into, and is also an indicator in standard 3 around multiple measures. So in our survey, we saw that parent perception does shift when we show them multiple measures. So that 92% believing their child is on grade level drops to 44% when we show parents 3 measures together. If we say, okay, your child received a B in math, but your state test results indicated below grade level in math, and your child's results on benchmark tests, so like Map Growth or iReady, indicated your child was below grade level in math. So their mindset shifts, and they also report that they would take action by talking to their child and reaching out to their child's teacher. The data also reveals, harder barriers, more complex barriers, but also opportunities. So many teachers feel fear they'll be blamed or won't be believed, and that they won't have the support from school leadership. Our research and other research shows that educators, lack formal training on family engagement. And I know lots of folks like you, Maggie, are doing great work around supporting teachers. So it's no surprise there's not formal training, that we see that only 28% of teachers rate themselves as excellent in helping parents feel valued and heard, and they acknowledge that that is a critical element to building trust. So I'll end by, in terms of the question around what grade to give, I think, again, grades are tricky. There's great work, like the work that Delisa is leading and others, around really meaningful homeschool teamwork, but it's not happening at scale. And would say, I think a lot about, districts and schools that might be giving themselves A's or B's, when in fact, what they're doing is well-intended, but really surface level events and sort of check the box. And so I will say, on a personal note, as the daughter of a lifelong educator and a mom, I have a lot of empathy for what it takes to have that deeper relationship, but it can also be really frustrating. I think that's the power of the PTA and, the vast audiences on this webinar today, that we each play a really important role in the work that sits beneath the standards.
Thanks for that. And I'm gonna turn it over to Maria, who I'd love for you to build a little bit on this question of challenges. Wendy, you mentioned a few, specifically one that I know that we think a lot about, which is how educators are even prepared to share academic progress. So Maria, I know you're over at WestEd, which is a great nonpartisan research development and service agency. So, from your vantage point, what do you see as some of the common challenges to family engagement that are learning centered? And how in your work at WestEd are you really helping to navigate those hurdles?
Thank you, Maggie. I think that we are out in the schools and working with districts on a regular basis. That's what we do. What we notice is that not all leaders, school, district, aren't necessarily synced in with the research that is out. They're not necessarily immersed in what family engagement can bring to their schools, how family engagement can improve learning outcomes, how it can improve school culture, social emotional development, wellness. They are not necessarily living in the same world that we all live in. So it's that in itself creates a big gap, I think. So I think leaders are focused on standards, on curriculum, on assessment, on teacher management, leadership in general, but not necessarily how can we leverage what is not in the school the rest of the time in a child's life, right? We say that children spend about 12% of their school year in receiving instructions, but that leaves a huge amount of time that can be leveraged with the work of families and those in the community, right? All of the opportunities that exist in the community. But I have I'm a very glass half full type person. And one of the things that I've been seeing lately quite a bit is that families are sounding the alarm. Families, through feedback with family surveys that our schools perform every year, Title I schools, what's coming back from families is, I need information, I need someone to talk to, I need to be informed, and I need to be in the know, and I need to know what to do so that I can be an asset for my child's learning. So that is happening over and over everywhere, I have noticed, because that's what causes districts and schools to reach out and say, help us. This is what families are saying we need to get better at, right? So that's families are speaking up, and I think that has something to do with what Judon just brought up earlier, is that families went from maybe being involved 10% to being involved 110% during the pandemic. And so they have a greater clarity and insight about what do they need to know and be able to do, and what kind of information, again, they need from the school to be a full asset, to be really somebody that works hand in hand with the classroom teacher and other family peers in the school. So what we do at West Ed when we work with schools is we really focus on developing capacity. So we work very closely with school leaders, district leaders, to improve systems and practices, and use data to support the engagement of families. It's very important that we look at what are we going to focus on when we actually bring families in, or when we communicate with families, maybe not in person, but virtually or through text or other kinds of technology. It's really important that we have a plan. So we work very closely with the district and school leadership, because it's really important that the entire system is working together, develops a vision, develops a plan, not just one school or not just one teacher in one grade level, but that everybody really is on the same page about what outcomes they want to get out of their efforts and investments in family engagement. We build the capacity of teachers, and their dispositions is a very important aspect of working with teachers, developing their ability, their confidence to work with families. And we work with teacher leaders and instructional coaches at the district level as well, so that we can build capacity, local capacity and expertise to keep the work going after we finish our portion of the work. But so the work keeps going. So part of what we do to support and build the capacity is we do professional development, and we really like to involve everyone. even the front office, the different administrators at the district level. We know that assessments, we know that student learning, we know that Title I, all of the different leaders at the district level need to be involved, need to be special education. Everybody really needs to be on the same page and sort of gain that foundational knowledge that is so important to make decisions together. So we do professional development. We also have continuous leadership coaching. So we sit around all the school leaders with the district leaders, and we do regular coaching. We do about 7 cycles during the school year of team coaching. And in this team coaching, this is where we solve problems, where we lift the things that work, and where everybody continues on that learning journey. We also work directly with teachers by grade level. We sit with each grade level group of teachers, and we develop the plans that they are going to follow to actually give families all that information that I mentioned earlier. They have to really be able to be prepared for that. They need to feel confident facilitating adult learning and really truly communicating with families on an ongoing basis and feeling good about what they are doing, because it starts showing in how their students come prepared for learning. That's really critical. So I don't want to stretch my part too much, but a lot of you that have heard of academic parent-teacher teams before know that what we really hope is to create a system that is predictable for families. Families know that once a quarter, they will come and become a team with all their other families in their classroom. If it's middle school, it might be their advisory team. But they come in and they build community. They get to know, they continue to get to know each other, build relationships, and all with the idea that this is not just while we're in the classroom, but once we leave, we can be each other's support. And then we dig into what are we learning right now and what are we going to be learning over the next quarter, so that families really have a simple yet practical understanding, conceptual understanding of what kids are learning in the classroom right now. And then we sit and dig into the data. How are the kids progressing in those priority core content areas? How, as a parent, can I support growth? So having a clear picture and getting used to discussing the data, it's critical. Once parents do it on a regular basis, it becomes part of their vocabulary. It becomes part of their abilities and skills, and they come to expect that they have that kind of communication with their teachers and their school. And they learn tips and strategies and activities that they can use at home for practice, and they set goals so that if the data says that my child is here in a certain aspect of learning, then I know that I can increase by this much the next time we come together. So a quarter later, I, as a parent, can actually make a big dent in how high my child and how fast my child can reach their goals. So all of that, so that teachers become confident facilitators of adult learning. And it's not necessarily about adding more events for parents to attend, but instead actually to become more efficient and use other events, but improve them, right?
Yeah.
Get them to work for families. And lastly, families becoming comfortable discussing data, meeting with other parents, and sharing best practices for them. So all of this is the goal and the reason why and how we work with families and how we build the capacity with everyone at all levels in the school district.
Maria, I know that you've spoken over the years about, the work that you're doing, and every time it's just great. Like I've just wrote this down, creating predictable systems for families. I think it's so simple, but not simple, but powerful. So thank you for that. And, I think that's actually a great segue to the question I'd like to pass over to Judan, who, again, is over at Power My Learning. And the Power My Learning family playlists are just such an incredible resource. I've had an opportunity to use and play around with them. And they're really hands-on weekly extension math activities that students lead their family partners through, really to deepen their own learning. So it really puts students in the driver's seat. So Judan, can you describe, I probably haven't done this, Jessica, so I'm going to ask you to do it. Can you describe the family playlists and how they support social emotional learning? And why this was an important focus for you all to include in this work.
Absolutely. And to frame sort of the importance of it, I'll just set a scene that we've probably mostly experienced ourselves. So you're at the dinner table and a parent or guardian might ask, so child, what did you learn today or experience in school? And inevitably the response is, well, nothing. And that might cycle through until that child graduates from college. And the reality is it's a sad state of affairs to show that parents are often closed out of the learning process, whether by design or otherwise. And we've talked about this multiple times already today, how parents don't often have insight into what's happening in the classroom. And they're also not meaningfully included as a participant in that learning process. So Family Playlist seeks to solve for that. And at the core, family playlists are designed to be engaging and gamified learning activities to be done at home between a parent or guardian and the child. And they're an extension of what's happening in the classrooms. We work hand in hand with schools and districts to align these activities directly to a scope and sequence or a curriculum to make it meaningful to teachers as well. And all of these playlists are designed in specific skills. So right now we offer playlists for K-2 math, just acknowledging the gaps that have surfaced post-pandemic and the need for, especially as we focus on early literacy a lot in our schools, the need for young people to also be focusing on numeracy. So playlists are delivered by text message. Research shows that 96% of people across America have access to a smartphone and at least access to text messages. And from there, parents can then access the playlist once a week through a landing page that can translate the playlist in up to 100 languages. Because again, we're trying to remove barriers for our parents. When they land on that page, what they'll see is an overview that describes the learning game that they're about to play. So they see an example in real time of a real family with a parent or guardian and a child playing that game. The game consists of regular household items. We're not having folks lean too heavily on manipulatives or things that you might not find in a given household, because again, we realize that not every household looks the same. Not all parents or guardians have access to the same resources in their home. So again, we want to limit the barriers that they're exposed to. And then from there, once they see the game in action, once they understand the academic concepts that are woven into the game, they can put their phone down. And we intentionally designed our family playlist this way to acknowledge that our young people are exposed to screens so much. And while screens offer a whole lot in terms of learning, they also come at the cost of relationships more often than not. So when we think about the relationships that we're building and sustaining at home, we want those relationships to be strengthened off the screen if possible. So they go off and they play the game, and then they come back and the parent or guardian comes back to the page on their phone, and they have an opportunity to give feedback on two levels. The first level is just a nod to how the student or their child enjoyed or didn't enjoy the learning game. And we want to trace that both for design purposes, but also to see if there are connections between sort of their gaps in learning and their enjoyment of the game. And the second layer of feedback is they get to ask prompts of their child, of their young person, to see, how is the learning sticking? What did they learn through going through that experience? What concepts might they need more support with? And that's captured via either audio or video. We do that so that it can get transmitted back to the teacher as an additional layer of feedback, almost like another formative assessment and data that they can then work with. One of the things that we really celebrate about this is the teacher can then see the young person in their home environment and see them as a learner differently. It also allows for the parent to see the young person in action, reinforcing their learning, calling out their learning gaps or areas of celebration. So in terms of social emotional learning, which is critically important to us, especially right now, especially as we think about holistically what we're trying to build in our young people post-pandemic, Family Playlist really centers three things. Number one, relationships. So relationships that are now strengthened as it relates to learning between parent or caregiver and student, as well as relationships that are now strengthened between parent and teacher, with that opportunity for collaboration and communication opened up through this experience. Number two, self-awareness for the young person, to be able to see and be able to talk about and narrate, here are my strengths, here are my areas for growth, or things that are a bit unfamiliar for me. And number three, what that leads to, and what we can strengthen in this triangle of learning relationships, is self-management. So being able to say, like, I don't feel as confident in this objective or in this skill, and here's where I might need more support from my family partner and or from my teacher. So again, we're excited about Family Playlists as sort of a product that we can offer to schools, districts, and families as a way to build, strengthen, and triangulate our learning efforts with our young people.
Thank you so much for that. I think that builds into our final question that I'm going to hand over to Delisa. As an administrator in Washoe County School District's Department of Family School Partnerships, your priority is really to support families and school staff to really work together on behalf of children. And, you know, I see a lot of questions going through the chat box around the importance of administration providing support and context for this work. So can you provide us with some examples and highlights of ways you and your team in Washoe County are supporting student success, and maybe even more importantly, how do you get families, students, and educators on the same page about how students are progressing? How do you do that from a district standpoint?
Thank you, Dr. Casp, and I really appreciate the comment about how do we support both educators and families, because in a large system, we really have to think about systemic efforts. And so I'll just highlight three ways. And the first one is our parent-teacher home visit program that we borrowed from Sacramento at least 10 years ago. And I believe our coordinator, I just want to point out her leadership. She's on this webinar, Rochelle Salonia. So you can message her if you have specific questions, but it's honestly the most effective way I've seen over 2 decades of families and educators coming together in a relationship that's positive, that's mutual, that's respectful. I think, Judan, you mentioned seeing kids in their own homes as learners, and we've really learned from our families and our educators over the years and from continuous evaluation that when our educators reach out and the family agrees to invite them into their home and it's respectful, they really see each other's strengths, that it ties back to the classroom in terms of reduced behavior. Our teachers and our families report increased motivation for our kids after they build that relationship. And so it's just a program that we believe in and have sustained for more than a decade. With the pandemic, we were really hearing how tired our educators were and how many things that were on their plate. And so with Rochelle's leadership in our district, we really focused in on celebrating and lifting up that practice. And so our new superintendent, Dr. Enfield, she gave our schools awards at the beginning of the year of schools who had gone above and beyond and done a lot of home visits. We individually recognize teachers who do 15 or more visits in a year. and we post them on social media and we lift them up. And we do that because we know and hope that that will lead to more home visits in the future and more of those meaningful relationships and connections. Our new superintendent, Dr. Enfield, she loves the practice and now goes on monthly home visits as well. So it's important to see leadership modeling that for our teachers as well, and our support staff. They're critically important. I'll lift up two other things. In our secondary schools, we have family liaisons. And so, you know, high schools are incredibly large. So in a high school of 2,000 to 2,500 kids, and that's probably relatively small in terms of other communities, our kids and our families can get lost, right? And so how do we build those meaningful connections and really center that on equity? So we use an early warning index to reach out and partner with our families and our kids that are most vulnerable of dropping out of high school. And so those liaisons in those school sites really focus in on that list, and we've learned over the years that we get to know the students first. That's critically important because in high school, you know, kids, I saw something in the chat about kids sometimes don't want their parents involved, and absolutely that's developmentally sometimes appropriate, that push and pull, right? So if we get to know the kids, and I also saw in the chat somebody mentioned goals, those family liaisons sometimes work with the school counselor and the school mental health professional and that student to set some individual goals, but they absolutely reach out to the families and keep them in that loop. That triangle that was mentioned earlier is so important. So those family liaisons are incredibly important in our middle schools and high schools, and we've actually used some of our ESSERS funding to expand those over the last couple of years. And then finally, I'll just highlight something that we recently received, which was really exciting for us. We have a Native Youth Community Project grant from the U.S. Department of Education, and it's primarily a mentoring grant. So the grant helped us to hire mentors for students for our 400 middle and high school Native students in the district. But in that model, we've been thoughtful about how do we build in those conversations to keep, so we learn from the student, we hear from the student, we absolutely, you know, maintain their confidentiality, but we also bridge those conversations to the school counselor, to relevant teachers and administration, and then to the home. And so trying to build in that triangulation into all of our models has been critically important. So those are just 3 ways. We have quite a bit of information on our website and our social media. I appreciate the conversations about the how, because sometimes the how is where we can trip up a little bit, right? The implementation can be tricky. So we're happy you can connect with any member of our team, and they are generous and they are always happy to share. So thank you.
And thank you, everyone. I'm gonna hand it over to Kwesi, who's gonna give us some themes and comments on what he's heard so far from the conversation.
Thanks, Maggie. You know, this has been just a wonderful, and thanks again to the panel. And we'll get to some of your questions in the Q&A segment afterwards. You know, there have been so many gems here. Obviously, intentionality is very important, and the running theme through all of this has been about building capacity, and a dual capacity building framework reminds us that there are 2 sides of a coin in terms of capacity building. We've got to build the capacity of educators and all of the adults who are kind of in the systems and structures that are supposed to be supporting kids. And so that's parents, families, guardians, that's also educators and everyone else. A lot of talk about systems and structures, using data effectively in real time, having a mindset around continuous improvement, but meaningful continuous improvement, employing creativity, learning from the success of others. I think Delisa gave a couple of examples of learning from other districts and other efforts, and using some, you know, evidence-based approaches. The information flow is very important. The Learning Heroes data reminds us that, you know, using data effectively is not only important for educators, but it's also important for parents and families. The more they know about the data for their kids, the better position they're in to really be that kind of ally. Power My Learning talked about effective allyship. There's a lot of attention to paying, to the whole child, but I think paying attention to the whole child requires a different kind of thinking that we still don't quite have as broadly as we want. Thinking beyond the role of individual schools or projects or programs or districts to involving community-based partners, other public-private collaborations, and obviously building and sustaining trusting relationships with families. The entire system has to work more closely together, as someone said. And another example of that is, someone in the chat mentioned that they were examining Head Start transition as a vehicle for beginning the communication process. A lot of buildings have Head Starts and pre-K programs, but the staff is not connected. The principal may not be connected to that work. The families, some of those same families have kids in Head Start, pre-K, and also other grades, but the relationship isn't there. And so intentionality is critical. Effective, Judon used the term effective allyship, which is definitely worth exploring. How do we build connections, the conditions to integrate into all of our systems and structures. And then the last thing I'll say, and I think we're all working on a chunk of this, we know there's a lot of evidence, we know there's a lot of research available on the effectiveness of family community engagement. And many leaders, school leaders and educators, superintendents and other district leaders, they're just not sufficiently immersed in that, to use Maria's language, in the relevance of that evidence or how to apply it within their roles and within their context. And that's where the disconnect is. There's this huge gap that many of us on this webinar are working to bridge. And so developing capacity is critical to that. This is kind of like the proverb, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So there are many of us that are trying our best to work in chunks on this program, and we have to continue to do that because developing capacity is still the right priority. And it is, I think, one of the critical pathways to making engagement and interaction with parents and families more predictable. So kudos again to the panelists and also to you, Maggie, for moderating this. And I think we have time to get back to some great questions in the Q&A.
Tell me about it. There are some really, really good questions in here that, quite frankly, I want to hear everyone's answer to in depth, but I know that we don't have time for that. So maybe the first question actually that I wanted to quickly give a nod to is from Stella Edwards. This came in through the chat. And she said, can someone address where we are in improving teacher degree program licensure in family engagement? And I'll just speak very briefly to some work we're actually doing over at NAFSP, the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement, but in partnership with IEL, National PTA, we've been running a consortium of educator preparation programs focused on family and community engagement. And we just released a framework in partnership with a number of faculty and state education agencies, really looking at how we might reimagine and how we might redefine how we prepare educators for family and community engagement. We know that this is probably one of the areas that is one of the biggest challenges in really building capacity. So, one of the things in your resource list that you'll see is this framework that we just released. But there's a lot of movement among a number of organizations, including the NEA, that are really trying to focus on this. There's also another great question that I would love to put to the panel that's coming in from Anonymous. But this person writes, thank you for saying that there are marginalized populations that may not be represented even in well-done family engagement. So I would love for each of you to maybe just very quickly, maybe in like a little popcorn way, can you share some thoughts on how to respond to those who indicate that if they aren't hearing about problems from multiple people, that it's not an issue to be addressed? Maria or Delisa, Don.
I can tell a little bit of what we do to mediate this. When we have the classroom meetings for families, and let's say that we have 65–70% of families who that teachers brought into the classroom and that participated, part of the important data is who didn't come. And creating a plan before the meeting for how we follow up with the families who didn't come, so that we can brainstorm what are the barriers? Do we need to figure out transportation and other things? How do we send the video showing families how to do the activities and explaining what happened? So these are all the kinds of brainstorming that we do with the administration and teachers, so that there is a plan for that too. That is, I think, one of the things that that it's going to make a difference, because we can't reach everybody, but we need to try.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, there has to be intentional efforts. Thank you,
Yeah.
Marie, for saying that. There has to be intentional efforts to reach out and reduce barriers. So whether or not those barriers are language, whether or not those barriers are a relationship, whether or not they're comfort and safety in speaking up, we have to let families know that their voices aren't, that every voice is important, and that it's safe to share their experiences, and that we are listening, and that we hear them, and that we're going to do our best to honor whatever it is they're saying that we can do to help improve their child's education. We have to. So when you do a survey in your district and it's not representative of your student population, there needs to be some intentional, equitable efforts to really hear from representative populations.
And I'll just say, to build off of both of those points, my challenge, especially for districts, is we're so good at collecting data. So start with the populations for whom you got the least representation, and don't move forward in your engagement until you've heard from them. Really as an accountable measure for us, because we have the data at our fingertips. We know who we haven't heard from, and more often than not, we make excuses for it. So really pushing ourselves to, if we're going to do this right, let's start from the folks we haven't heard from.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to offer just a quick resource for folks who may not have heard of it. Street Data is a really great resource that really looks at the intersection of equity, and some of the themes that you've shared is really, sort of hitting the pavement to reach folks. And we're actually starting some work in Highline School District, where, building off of the great work that Superintendent Enfield established, they are, really becoming great students, as they've shared around street data and what it looks like for them. So I wanted to offer that as a resource.
That's a really great resource. And actually, what I'm going to do is, unfortunately, just due to time, we're not going to have a chance to get to all of these questions, but I'd love to encourage everyone to reach out to family engagement at PTA.org for more questions, or if you'd like to get some insights on the questions that have been asked. I know that the team there is super responsive, and we'll get back to you. But I think one way I'd love to close, we have a few minutes left, is to maybe just do a little bit of a share around, starting maybe with Wendy. Can you share just one way our webinar audience can get involved with your work? What's one thing that you'd like the audience to do?
Yeah, so we have a growing amount of work centered around building capacity. We just kicked off our first cohort around our Family Engagement Leadership Institute, and would also love to pull in a plug. We are about to launch a pretty big public awareness campaign leading into the summer for parents that really leans into the disconnect that we talked about. So two ways.
That's great. Maria?
I think that our team would love to work with anyone that feels that they feel invested and committed to this work. And so you can reach me at WestEd. If you go to wested.org, you can easily send me an email. But I think there are some great resources out now. There's I think being curious and reading articles of all types and reaching out. That was one of the things that I did when I was starting out, is I would read an article and reach out to that person and maybe ask them for 10 minutes to have a further conversation, just to really become a little bit more fully capable, I think, of leading at your school level, at your district level. That's really, really important. And inviting others to participate in webinars like this. These are happening regularly, and they're excellent panelists that offer amazing services and information. So I think following up on those kinds of resources.
That's awesome. Judan?
Yeah, I'll say three quick things. Going back to the nod around street data, being able to talk to any and everyone who's willing to listen, especially elected officials, about what really matters in schools these days, how we complement and supplement the importance of academic outcomes with SEL outcomes, wellness outcomes, the feelings of being cared for and connected in our school communities is critically important right now. In our Leave Behind resources, we have a link to a case study of our work in a school in San Jose. And it really illuminates the importance of bold school leadership and a school leader who said, yes, academic outcomes, but I'm also going to create the conditions for SEL fresh out of the pandemic. So just a spotlight for us to consider and try to replicate in our work. And lastly, we're really trying to get away from doing workshops directly in service of families and building that muscle in schools to be able to do it for a more direct partnership. So if you're interested in that, reach out to us. We would love to, especially if you're a parent-facing organization, equip you with the advocacy to bring that to your schools.
That's terrific. So Lisa.
I would say I've been incredibly fortunate over the last 2 decades to learn from colleagues like Dr. Paredes, mentors like Kwesi, and you, Dr. Casp. So networking is incredibly important, and you aren't alone out there if you're trying to do this work in your district. So I'm going to put something in the chat. The IEL supports, it's our district leaders network across the nation. So if you're leading this work in a district network, join that network. It's free. And there's an incredible group of people that you can learn from. And if you don't lead family engagement in your district, still reach out. If you're a parent leader in your district, you know, our team is always willing to have a conversation, phone conversation. We reach out to other districts all the time. And that's, I think, grown our work the most. Thank you.
So you heard it here. Everyone email everyone here. And we'll continue the conversation. And it looks like we'll be continuing to have this conversation in June at the IEL conference. But thank you so much also for sharing these resources. They are located in a folder we are placing in the chat now, and we'll be sending that out to all of you in a follow-up email. So I'm going to hand it back over to Daniel, who's going to take us home. But thank you, everyone, for having me here today. And I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been really rich.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cass. So once again, just thank you to our incredible moderator. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you to each of our panelists today for a wonderful conversation. Judan, Delisa, Wendy, Maria. We appreciate all of you for being here today and joining in on such an incredible conversation. And thank you to everybody that's watching this as well. So before I close out, I just want to remind everyone that this session was recorded. We'll be sending out the recorded and the saved chat in its entirety to everyone in a follow-up email. At this time, I am going to be launching a Zoom poll for each of you. We'd like you each to take just a couple minutes to fill this out so we can continue to improve for our future webinars in the series. Our next Transforming Family School Partnerships PTA National Standards webinar will be on Wednesday, March 29th. The focus of this session will be Speak Up for Every Child and Share Power, where we will hear from Marcia Coward, who is a District Family Engagement Manager at DeKalb County School District with their Community Empowerment, Innovation, and Partnerships Division, Lindsay Kubatsky, Director of Policy and Advocacy at the National Center for Learning Disabilities, and Adrian Smith, who is a Youth Ambassador at the Human Rights Campaign. So we'll hear about their work in advancing standards number 4 and number 5. Everyone that registered for this webinar has also been registered for other webinars in the series. We highly encourage you to share this registration link, which I'm placing in the chat now, with your colleagues, your friends, your contacts, your networks, so we can get a large variety of individuals engaged in this conversation. Once again, thank you all very much for your participation today, and we look forward to seeing you later this month. Have a good rest of the day.